A shoebox had been sitting on the top shelf of Ruth Elaine Patterson's closet in Memphis, Tennessee, for 51 years. Inside it were 43 letters, never opened, never sent, and one photograph of two newborn babies lying side by side in a hospital bassinet, each wearing a pink knit hat, their fists touching. Ruth had not put that photograph in the box herself. Her adoptive mother had handed it to her on the morning of Ruth's 27th birthday and said, "There's something you need to know." Ruth had looked at the picture for a long time. Then she put it in the shoebox, put the shoebox on the top shelf, and did not look at it again for 22 years. Not because she didn't want to know, but because she was afraid that looking would cost her more than she had left to spend. She was 78 years old when she walked onto the Family Feud stage, and she was still carrying that shoebox, not in her hands, but in the part of a person that never really puts something down. What happened on that stage would be watched 310 million times in 11 days. It was a Tuesday morning, March 4th, 2019, Stage 6, Trilith Studios, Fayetteville, Georgia. The Patterson family wore burgundy. There were 5 of them: Ruth, her son Gerald, his wife Tamara, and their 2 adult children. They had flown in from Memphis the night before. Ruth had packed a cardigan even though the forecast said 70 degrees. She packed it because she always got cold in unfamiliar places, and because she wanted something familiar on her body when she walked out on that stage. Gerald had filled out the application 4 months ago on her behalf, a birthday surprise, and when he told her, she had laughed and said, "Boy, I am too old for a game show." But she had ironed her burgundy shirt. She had gotten her hair done on Saturday. She had tucked the shoebox into her carry-on bag without telling anyone. Gerald did not know about the shoebox. Nobody knew about the shoebox except Ruth and the woman who had given it to her, and that woman had been gone for 16 years. Steve would later call what happened next the most important moment of his entire career. Ruth had been born on November 9th, 1940, at County General Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee. Her birth mother was 19 years old, unmarried, and alone in a city where she had no family. The hospital records from 1940 showed she had given birth to 2 girls, identical twins, and had signed the relinquishment papers on the 3rd day. The 2 babies were separated before they left the hospital. Ruth went to a family in Memphis. The second baby, Ruth had never known her name, never known where she went, disappeared into the machinery of mid-century adoption the way thousands of children did, into a silence that was legal and final and complete. Ruth's adoptive parents were good people. They loved her. They gave her a life. Her mother had been a school teacher. Her father had worked at the Postal Service for 31 years. Ruth grew up in a yellow house on a street with elm trees, and she was happy in that house, genuinely happy. And she had spent most of her adult life refusing to let the knowledge of the shoebox eat the happiness she had been given. But there was a habit she could not explain, and had never tried to. Every morning since she was a young woman, Ruth got up before sunrise and went to her back porch and tended her rose bushes. She talked to them, not prayers exactly, more like quiet conversations. She had done this in every house she had ever lived in. She could not say why. It was just something she needed to do before the day began. In 2018, a woman named Dorothy Jane Simmons from a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, submitted a DNA sample to an ancestry website on a Tuesday afternoon. She was 77 years old. She had been adopted as an infant in 1940 and had spent 50 years looking, quietly, in her own way, without making a fuss, for any biological relative. She had tried official channels in the 1970s, written letters in the 1980s, hired a private researcher briefly in the 1990s who found nothing. She had eventually stopped. Not because she had given up, but because she was tired. And because she had a good life, A husband named Earl who had died in 2011. 2 sons, 4 grandchildren. A house she loved, and she had decided that wanting something you could not find was its own kind of damage. But on a Tuesday afternoon in 2018, her granddaughter set up an Ancestry account for her as a birthday gift. Dorothy Jean submitted the sample more out of politeness than hope. 6 weeks later, she got a notification. 99.998% identical DNA match. The other person's name was Ruth Elaine Patterson. Memphis, Tennessee, born November 9th, 1940. Dorothy Jean sat in her kitchen for a long time, with her hands flat on the table. Then she called her son Marcus and said, "I think I have a sister." Neither woman had contacted the other yet. Marcus had reached out to Gerald. Gerald, trying to find a way to bring them together that would not overwhelm either of them, had submitted a Family Feud application listing both families. A twin reunion episode, he called it. The show's producers had arranged it. They had flown both families to Georgia on the same flight. Ruth and Dorothy Jean had been kept in separate green rooms all morning. They had not yet seen each other. They did not know they had one more thing in common. Dorothy Jean Simmons also grew roses. Every morning. Before sunrise. Since she was a young woman, she had never been able to explain why. The studio fell completely silent when the producers walked out and explained the setup to Steve Harvey before the taping began. He read the briefing card. He set it down on the podium. He stood there for a long moment, and the director said later that Steve's hands were shaking slightly before the cameras even started rolling. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. The taping began. The Patterson family on one side, the Simmons family on the other. Ruth walked out in her burgundy shirt and her cardigan. Dorothy Jean walked out in the Simmons family color, teal. They were placed at opposite podiums, 15 feet apart, facing the host platform. Steve stood between them. Ruth saw her sister's face for the first time when Dorothy Jean came through the curtain. She grabbed the podium with both hands. Gerald put his arm around her. She shook her head once. She didn't need steadying, and stood up straight and looked at this woman across the stage who had her nose, her jaw, her hands. The exact way she held her shoulders, slightly forward. Dorothy Jean had stopped walking. She stood at her mark, 15 feet away, and looked back. Steve Harvey did not say anything for 11 seconds. 11 seconds of live television silence is an eternity. The director did not cut. Nobody moved. The audience of 220 people held completely still, and the only sound in the studio was the soft hiss of the ventilation system and the sound of Ruth Patterson exhaling in a long, slow breath that she had apparently been holding for 78 years. Steve said, barely above a whisper, "Do you want to go to her?" Ruth said, "Yes." She let go of the podium and walked across the stage. The studio fell completely silent. When Ruth reached Dorothy Jean, neither of them spoke. Ruth put both hands on her sister's face, the way you touch something you are not sure is real, and Dorothy Jean covered Ruth's hands with her own. They stood like that for a long time. Steve Harvey turned away from the camera. His shoulders moved once. A producer in the booth said later she had never seen him do that before. Gerald was crying. Tamara was crying. Marcus Simmons was leaning on the podium with his face buried in his arm. 3 members of the lighting crew had put down their equipment. The boom operator, the same man who had worked 9 seasons, stood in the corner with his hand over his mouth. Ruth said into her sister's shoulder, "I had your picture. I carried your picture for 51 years. Dorothy Jean said, "I didn't even know what you looked like." Ruth pulled back and looked at her and said, "You grow roses, don't you?" It was not a question. Dorothy Jean's face changed. Every morning, before sunrise. The studio came apart. Steve Harvey turned back around. His eyes were wet, and he did not try to hide it. He stood in front of both women and said, 78 years. One morning, he stopped. He could not continue for a moment. He pressed his fingers against his eyes and took a breath. Then he said, "Let me tell you something." His voice was rough. I was living in my 1976 Ford Tempo, showering in gas stations, eating out of trash cans. 3 years in that car, by myself, thinking nobody in this world was connected to me. He paused. And I have stood on a lot of stages. I have seen a lot of things. But 78 years. He shook his head. Roses, he could not finish the sentence. He pulled out his phone. The executive producer said, quietly from the booth, "Steve, we're still rolling," Steve said. "I know." He dialed. It rang twice. His daughter Lori answered. He said, "Baby, I need you to help me do something. I have 2 women standing next to me. They are 78 years old, and they just met each other for the first time. I need someone to help them find out everything. Their birth mother's name, their history, whatever records exist." Tonight, Lori said, "Daddy, I'm already on it." The audience made a sound that was not applause. It was something older than applause. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to camera 2 and looked straight into the lens. If you are watching at home and you were adopted, and you have a name or a date you have been holding on to, I'm asking you tonight. Send the test, make the call, file the request. Do not wait until you are 78 years old because you are afraid. The door might be open and you don't know it. He paused. These 2 women grew roses every morning for 78 years, and they never knew why. They were reaching for each other in the only way they knew how. Don't let that be you. Don't wait. He announced that both families would receive the full prize, $20,000 each, $40,000 total, regardless of the game's outcome. Neither family had even finished the first round. Nobody in that room cared. The Simmons family's youngest, a woman named Keisha, walked across the stage to the Patterson family side and took Gerald's hand. Gerald looked at her. She said, "Our mamas are going to need us to handle everything for a while." Gerald laughed, the first laugh in 20 minutes, and the room breathed again. The clip was posted at 10:30 p.m. by a production assistant who had filmed the last 15 minutes on his personal phone. By 6 a.m., it had 22 million views. By Thursday, it had 115 million. By the following Sunday, the counter read 310 million. The hashtag 78 years trended in 51 countries for 9 straight days. 3 documentary production companies reached out within a week. A genealogy nonprofit saw the clip and offered both families full research services free of charge, ancestry, birth records, any surviving records of their birth mother at no cost. The genealogy team found their birth mother's name in 6 days. Clara Mae Jeffries, Nashville, Tennessee. She had died in 1997. She had never married. She had kept a journal. In the journal, in an entry dated November 9th, 1963, her daughter's 23rd birthday, she wrote that she thought about them every year on that date, and that she hoped they were somewhere with a garden, because she had loved growing roses, and she hoped she had given that to them somehow. Ruth Patterson read that entry on a Tuesday morning, sitting on her back porch, in front of her rose bushes. She did not tell anyone what it said for 3 days. She just sat with it. Steve Harvey established the Morning Rose Foundation, named for Clara Mae Jeffries' journal entry and the habit her daughters had carried without knowing why. within 45 days of the taping. In its first year, the foundation partnered with 4 major genealogy platforms to provide free DNA testing and record searches for adoptees over 65 who could not afford the services themselves. It processed over 18,000 applications. It facilitated 231 confirmed family reunions in its first 12 months. By its second year, it had served over 50,000 people. Steve said in an interview with The Atlantic, "Those 2 women grew roses every morning for 78 years. They were connected the whole time. They just didn't have the language for it yet." Ruth and Dorothy Jean spent Thanksgiving together that year, the first time. They cooked in Dorothy Jean's kitchen in Columbus. Ruth brought her cardigan. Dorothy Jean made sweet potato pie from a recipe she had gotten from a neighbor 30 years ago. Ruth took one bite and stopped chewing. She said, "My mother made this exact recipe." Dorothy Jean looked at her. "Mine too," she said. They both looked at the pie for a moment. Then Ruth said, "We are going to need a bigger table." They have not spent a Thanksgiving apart since. There is a photograph now, taken by Gerald on that Tuesday morning in Fayetteville, just after Ruth let go of the podium and before she reached her sister, of a 78-year-old woman walking across a stage with her chin up and her hands out, moving towards something she had been carrying for 51 years. Ruth has a print of it on her kitchen wall, next to the back door that leads to the porch, where the rose bushes are. She says good morning to it every day before she goes outside. Some things that are lost are not gone. Some doors that look closed are just waiting for someone to stop being afraid and push. And sometimes the reason you have done something your whole life, the habit you cannot explain, the thing you reach for before the day begins, is not a mystery at all. It is just love that did not have an address yet. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe so you are here when the next one comes. And leave a comment. Is there something you have been carrying that you haven't been able to put down? This community holds those stories carefully. Someone tonight needs to know they are not the only one.